Dear viewers, the following stories are inspired by real events. However, the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story 1. Howl in the Deep Woods. Jake, Emily, and Chris, whose real names were Ryan, Megan, and Josh, three close friends, decided to go on a weekend camping trip in a remote area of Olympic National Park in Washington in late summer of 2021. All three were nature enthusiasts and wanted an adventurous getaway. Far from the hustle and bustle of city life, they chose a campsite deep in the woods, near a small stream surrounded by towering ancient trees. When they arrived, dusk was falling, and the forest became still and somewhat eerie. The first night passed peacefully around the campfire. They roasted sausages, told jokes, and gazed at the starry sky. Late into the night, as everyone had crawled into their tents to sleep, they began to hear strange noises echoing from the surrounding woods. Rustling in the undergrowth sounded too deliberate, and strange animal calls that they couldn't identify. Jake, the most experienced camper, reassured his two friends that it was probably just raccoons or deer. But as the night wore on, those noises grew clearer and closer. They heard footsteps moving around their campsite. Just outside their tents, Emily, who was easily spooked, began to feel uneasy. Chris, usually the joker, tried to make light of it, but even his voice had a slight tremor. The next morning, after a nearly sleepless night, they decided to venture deeper into the woods to explore, hoping to find the source of the strange noises. They hiked along a small trail and soon discovered an abandoned, dilapidated cabin nestled among the ancient trees. The cabin looked very old and rotten, with crooked wooden planks and empty window sockets. A cold and eerie feeling enveloped the place. When they returned to their campsite in the afternoon, the strange phenomena began to intensify. Objects in their tents seemed to have been moved around. A few small items mysteriously disappeared. They heard faint whispers carried on the wind, and the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. Emily, during a moment alone to use the restroom, saw a tall, shadowy figure quickly pass between the trees in the darkness, causing her to scream in terror as she ran back to the tent. They tried to explain these things with natural reasons, like wild animals or their imaginations, but the increasing frequency and intensity of the phenomena made it impossible to deny that something very unusual was happening. They decided to leave their campsite earlier than planned. However, when they started packing up, they discovered that the trail they had come in on was blocked by a large, recently fallen ancient tree. They had no way to move it, and their cell phones had no signal at all. They felt trapped and increasingly scared. The second night in the woods was a truly terrifying one. They heard loud banging noises echoing through the forest. Their tents shook violently, and they saw clearer, more menacing shadowy figures lurking around their campsite. Jake, during a moment when he went to get more firewood, saw a tall figure standing among the trees, its eyes glowing brightly in the darkness. Staring directly at him, he rushed back to the tent, his heart pounding in his chest. In desperation, they tried to build a larger fire to ward off whatever was tormenting them. They huddled together around the fire, holding each other tightly in fear, trying to stay awake all night. Around 3 a.m., they heard a very loud howl echoing from deep within the forest. A howl that sounded like a wild animal but had an eerie and mournful tone. The howl reverberated through the woods, sending a chill down all three of their spines. They began to tell each other ghost stories they had heard, trying to find any explanation for what was happening. Chris recalled a local legend about a wandering spirit in these woods. the spirit of a man who had gotten lost and starved to death many years ago. People said that his spirit often howled in the night to call out to other lost souls. Their attempts to scare away or appease this entity were all in vain. The supernatural phenomena continued, becoming even more aggressive. The climax occurred in the early hours of the morning, as all three of them were trying to doze off in their tent. They heard the sound of the tent fabric being ripped open. A tall, dark figure appeared right at the tent entrance, growling menacingly. Jake quickly grabbed the machete he had brought for protection. In the chaotic moment, they tried to fight back. Jake swung the machete at the dark figure, but it seemed to have no effect. The figure grabbed Emily's arm and dragged her out of the tent. Chris and Jake lunged at the figure, trying to rescue Emily. The struggle took place in the darkness, filled with screams and terrifying growls. Finally, with a tremendous effort, they managed to push the figure away and together ran frantically towards the stream. Hoping to find a way out, they ran non-stop until daybreak, and eventually, they found a trail leading out of the forest. They had survived, but the terrifying experience on that camping trip left a deep emotional scar on their minds. They never dared to return to those woods again. Story 2. Call in the Lonely Night. The Davis family, whose real name was the Coleman family, consisting of Mark, Sarah, and their 2 young children, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Tom, decided to go on a weekend camping trip in a remote and supposedly haunted area of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington in early fall of 2023. Mark and Sarah both wanted their children to have some experiences close to nature. And they had heard chilling stories about this forest, which only added to their excitement. When they arrived at their chosen campsite, dusk was falling. The area was beautiful but also carried an inexplicable sense of unease. Perhaps due to the stories Mark and Sarah had once heard. The first evening passed pleasantly around the campfire. They roasted sausages, sang children's songs, and gazed at the starry sky. Late into the night, after the children had fallen asleep in their tent, Mark and Sarah began to hear strange noises in the woods, whispers that sounded too close. The snapping of twigs when no animals were visible. Lily woke up in the middle of the night, insisting that she had seen a strange figure standing outside their tent. Mark and Sarah tried to reassure their daughter, saying it was just a bad dream. The next day, they went for a hike and found an old, abandoned structure, like a dilapidated shack or a forgotten cemetery, which exuded an ominous aura. The children found a strange old doll there, and Tom insisted on bringing it back to the tent. Back at the campsite, the paranormal activity intensified. They heard loud knocking on trees. Objects went missing and reappeared, and the children became increasingly scared, reporting more sightings of the strange figure. Tom started talking to someone unseen, calling them a sad lady who wanted to play with him. This deeply worried Mark and Sarah. They tried to leave the campsite, but their car wouldn't start. Mark checked everything thoroughly but couldn't find the reason. Their cell phones also had no signal, leaving them completely isolated. Their second night was filled with terror. They heard clearer voices. Their tents were shaken violently, and they saw more vivid and menacing apparitions around their campsite. Lily and Tom seemed to become the focus of the entity's attention. Mark and Sarah tried to protect their children, experiencing increasingly frightening events themselves, such as feeling cold touches or seeing shadows moving inside their tent. They found some strange symbols carved on rocks nearby, hinting at the identity or tragic history of the entity haunting them. Tom seemed to have a strange connection with the sad lady, often giggling to himself and saying incomprehensible things. Their attempts to ward off the spirit, using items they had brought or things they found in the woods, had little to no effect. The story reached its climax late one night. As the whole family was trying to sleep in their tent, they heard a very close female voice whispering, calling Tom's name. Immediately after, Tom began to float up out of his sleeping bag, his eyes wide open and white, and a strange smile spread across his lips. Mark and Sarah frantically tried to pull Tom down, but an invisible force seemed to be holding him up. They felt an icy chill engulf the tent. Suddenly, the whispering voice spoke again, this time colder and more threatening. "You will never leave here." In desperation, Mark remembered a small crucifix that his mother had given Lily before the trip. He quickly took it out and held it towards Tom. As soon as the crucifix came close to Tom, he screamed in agony and fell back into his sleeping bag. The darkness seemed to thicken inside the tent. With no time to think, Mark and Sarah quickly pulled their children out of the tent. They ran frantically through the darkness, not knowing where to go. They heard footsteps chasing after them and eerie whispers echoing in their ears. Finally, they reached the stream they had seen earlier. Mark remembered that there was a small trail leading along the stream. They followed the trail, running non-stop until daybreak. They had escaped the forest, but the terrifying memories of that camping night would forever haunt them and their children. They never dared to return to the Gifford Pinchot National Forest again. Story 3. Fate on the Deadly Trail. 6 college students, Liam, Maya, Noah, Olivia, Ethan, and Chloe, whose real names were Kevin, Ashley, Brandon, Brittany, Dylan, and Courtney, decided to enjoy their spring break with an adventurous camping trip on the Appalachian Trail in a remote area of North Carolina in the spring of 2018. They were all energetic young people eager to explore the pristine beauty of nature. They chose a campsite deep in the woods, far from any residential areas, accessible only after hours of hiking on steep, rocky trails. When they arrived, night had already fallen, and the dense forest around them became dark and isolated. The first night passed quite pleasantly around the campfire. They roasted sausages, sang songs, and told each other ghost stories, creating a warm and friendly atmosphere. Late into the night, after everyone had crawled into their tents to sleep, they began to hear strange noises echoing from the surrounding forest, peculiar rustling sounds, the snapping of branches for no apparent reason, and even eerie howls that they couldn't identify the animal. Liam, known for being the most easily scared in the group, insisted that he had seen a shadowy figure flitting between the trees. The others tried to reassure him, attributing it to his imagination playing tricks in the darkness. The next day, they continued their hike along a steep and rocky trail. They passed through old-growth forests, towering cliffs, and rushing streams. They also encountered a few other groups of hikers and heard chilling stories about the area, about mysterious disappearances and lingering ghosts. As dusk began to fall and they returned to their campsite, the strange phenomena began to intensify. They heard louder noises, felt unusual cold spots, and occasionally glimpsed dark shadows flitting between the trees. Liam became increasingly anxious and fearful. On the second night, after everyone had settled into their tents, Liam suddenly screamed. Maya and Noah rushed to his tent and found him in a state of extreme panic, stammering that he had just seen a ghostly face peering at him through the thin tent fabric. In his terror, Liam bolted out of the tent and started running blindly through the dark woods towards a steep, rocky area. The others frantically called after him, but he didn't stop. Shortly after, they heard a blood-curdling scream that tore through the night, followed by a sickening thud. The remaining 5 students were horrified and rushed in the direction of the sound. Using their flashlights to navigate the dense darkness and treacherous terrain, they found Liam at the bottom of a steep cliff, having fallen to his death. The scene before them filled everyone with shock and utter grief. In their panicked attempt to seek help or return to their campsite, 2 other members of the group, Olivia and Ethan, tripped over exposed tree roots in the dark and sustained injuries. Olivia sprained her ankle, and Ethan suffered a deep cut on his leg. The remaining 3, Maya, Noah, and Chloe, tried to stay calm and assess the situation. They realized that moving in the dark was too dangerous and decided to wait until morning to seek help. Throughout the rest of the night, Maya, Noah, and Chloe stayed together, huddled for warmth and comfort, while still hearing strange noises and feeling a palpable sense of dread enveloping the surrounding forest. As dawn broke, they carefully made their way back to their campsite, all of them shaken and traumatized by the horrific events of the previous night. Once back at the campsite, they used their remaining resources to try and contact the authorities or hike out to find help. Carrying the heavy burden of their tragic loss and the injuries of their friends, they were eventually rescued, but the terrifying camping trip left an indelible scar on the minds of the survivors. They would never forget that fateful night on the Appalachian Trail. If you want to hear more true horror stories, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.